Today, we're diving deep into a single but incredibly powerful verse from the Qur'an, the 26th verse of Surah Al-Aʿrāf. We're going to conduct a kind of forensic analysis, unpacking it layer by layer to get at what it really means and how it connects to a much larger story. So, here's our game plan for this deep dive. We'll kick things off with the central puzzle of the verse itself, this idea of divine clothing. Then we'll get into the nature of God's commands, which is key. From there, we'll look at Satan's rebellion, the symbolic meanings of fire and clay, the real purpose behind the prostration to Adam, and finally, we'll tie it all back together with the concept of the armor of righteousness.
All right, let's start at the beginning, with the verse itself. Because right from the get-go, it presents this fascinating puzzle that basically forces you to look beyond the surface.
Okay, so this is it. This is our foundational text. Now, notice right away how it mentions two very different kinds of clothing. There's the first kind, the one for physical concealment and looking good, but then it immediately introduces a second kind, and it says this one is best, the clothing of righteousness. And this right here is the question that unlocks the entire analysis. What does it actually mean for God to bestow or send down clothing? I mean, are we talking about a literal physical act? Or is this pointing to something much deeper, something metaphysical, a divine provision for both our bodies and our souls? This is the rabbit hole we're about to go down. So the verse immediately sets up this powerful contrast. On one side, you've got physical clothes. They cover our bodies, they're a form of adornment, pretty straightforward. But on the other side, and this is the crucial part, you have the spiritual clothing of righteousness, or taqwa. This is the clothing that's meant to cover our spiritual flaws, our pride, our jealousy, our anger. It's called the best provision, not for our bodies, but for our souls. Now, to really understand the story that this verse is a part of, we need to get a handle on a really critical distinction between two different types of divine commands. Honestly, understanding this is the key to everything that follows. First up, you have what's known as the takwini command. This is the creative or formative command. Think of it like the source code of the universe. When God issues this type of command, like be, things just happen. They spring into existence. There's no room for argument or disobedience. It's an irresistible, creative force, like the law of gravity. But then you have the tashri'i, or legislative command. Now this one's completely different. This isn't about creating reality, it's about guiding it. This is divine law, the guidance given to beings who have free will, like humans and jinn. And because it's aimed at beings with free will, it can be obeyed or it can be disobeyed. There's a choice involved. And here is where it all clicks into place. That famous command in the Qur'an for the angels and Iblis, who we know as Satan, to prostrate before the newly created Adam, that was a legislative command, a tashri'i command. And that one fact changes everything about how we have to read this story. So, why is this such a big deal? Well, think about it. If the command to prostrate had been a creative command, a takwini one, disobedience would have been literally impossible. It just couldn't have happened. The very fact that Iblis could refuse, that he had the ability to say no, tells you everything. It wasn't an act of irresistible creation, it was a test of will. And that distinction leads us directly to the very first act of conscious disobedience, and the reasoning, the anatomy really, of what fueled it. This is so fascinating. When God asks him why he didn't obey, listen to Satan's logic. He doesn't say, "You don't have the power to command me." No, he challenges the command itself based on his own perceived superiority. "I am better than him," he says. "You created me from fire and you created him from clay." This whole rebellion is rooted in arrogance, in a perceived hierarchy of what they're made of. God's response here is so telling. He doesn't force him to obey. Instead, he confirms that a choice has been made, a path has been chosen, and there will be consequences. Iblis is given a respite, a period of time to carry out his rebellion, which just further confirms that this whole thing is happening within the realm of free will and legislative commands. So this is the core idea we have to grasp. Satan's rebellion wasn't some kind of glitch in the system, it was a conscious choice. And that means his power, his influence, isn't about physical force. It's about appealing to the free will of others, whispering suggestions and exploiting the same arrogance he fell for. He tempts with arguments, not by compulsion, because his own fall was all about choice. So let's really drill down into this whole fire versus clay argument, because it's not just an excuse. The source material presents it as a profound symbol for two completely opposite spiritual states.
And this image really captures the whole idea perfectly. The entire primordial conflict, that first great split, is completely rooted in the perceived nature of these two elements of creation. The whole drama really does unfold from this comparison.
Okay, so here's the philosophical breakdown. Fire, or nar in Arabic, is seen as a symbol for arrogance and pride. I mean, think about it. Fire is always moving upward, it's chaotic, it's unstable, it thinks it's superior. Clay, or teen, is the exact opposite. It represents humility, submission, being grounded. It's stable, you can shape it, it has potential for growth, and it doesn't hide its humble origins in the earth. The idea is that these inherent qualities pretty much dictated how they'd respond to God's command. And Scripture itself directly supports this elemental origin story. Right here in Surah Ar-Rahman, it says very clearly that the jinn, which is the type of being Iblis came from, were created from a smokeless flame of fire. And what's amazing is that in the verse right before that one, in the same chapter, Scripture confirms humanity's origin from clay, describing it as being like pottery, something that's shaped and formed from a humble, earthy material. So the stage is set with these two very different natures. So this whole situation naturally leads to a really profound theological question, and it's one that our source material tackles head-on to make sure there's no misunderstanding. This is a really critical point. Given that the absolute core of Islam is the prohibition of idolatry, or shirk, how could God command his creation to prostrate before another creation, Adam? It looks like a major contradiction on the surface. And the resolution to this is crystal clear, and it's a cornerstone of Islamic theology. The act of prostration was not an act of worshiping Adam. It was an act of worshiping God by showing absolute obedience to his command. In this specific case, Adam was simply the qibla, the direction for the prostration, not the object of it. The real test was about pure submission. Would they obey God, no matter what? And if you look at the wording of the command itself from another chapter, it backs this up completely. The command to prostrate comes right after God says he has fashioned Adam and breathed his spirit into him. So the prostration is framed as a response to and an acknowledgement of a divine act that God himself performed. And now we're going to bring it all home. We're going to see how all these pieces, the nature of command, the choice of disobedience, the essence of fire and clay, circle all the way back to that original verse about clothing. So we're back to this concept of libas al-taqwa, the clothing of righteousness. And we can see now that it's not a physical thing. It's an inner state of being. It's God consciousness, it's piety, and most importantly, it's humility. It's a state of the soul that acts as a kind of spiritual armor. And here's the ultimate connection. This spiritual clothing is called the best because it's the embodiment of that humble nature of clay. It is the perfect spiritual antidote to the fiery arrogance of Iblis. To wear this clothing is to consciously choose humility and to submit to God's legislative commands, the very test that Satan failed so spectacularly. And this brings everything full circle. Physical clothing covers our physical nakedness, but the clothing of righteousness is our internal defense system. It protects the soul from those whispers of arrogance, of pride, of thinking we know better, the exact spiritual disease that caused Satan's downfall in the first place. And so, we're left with this final, profound question to think about. If this righteousness is a garment given to us by God, then how do we actively put it on? How do we choose to wear it and maintain it in every single moment of choice we face, when we're constantly caught between the whisper of fire and the humility of clay?